now, ladies and gentlemen, by popular demand, we're bringing a guy all the way from Washington, D.C., had to drag him out of the Pentagon because he loves spending every hour there. If you don't know, Major General Frank Tate, who is the Director of Army Aviation in the Pentagon, G357, if there is money, programming, fielding, whatever's happening, it starts in that office. And so you're in for a treat to hear from him. He is now on short final. In about 30 days, he will be in Afghanistan, and I'm sure he'll tell you about that. And the guy coming in behind him, if you see him, he is absolutely shaking because his name is Dave Francis, and he's coming in to be the Director of Army Aviation behind Frank. And he goes, I know I do not have that big brain that Frank does. So without further ado, Frank Tate.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you, Steve. Too generous, as usual. I appreciate all of you hardcore folks that have stayed this long and attended my very first performance of the off-Broadway presentation of the one-man show that I call An Interview with Courtney and Jen. The rest of you are also allowed to ask questions, but I'm counting on my usual favorites to come through. As he said, my job right now is the Director of Army Aviation for the G357 Headquarters Department of Army Staff. And most of this audience right now is made up of my staff, so I appreciate you all being loyal participants. And for the rest of you that are just looking for a place to sit down, we'll try and entertain you for a few minutes at least. Department of Army operates across all components. It is the staff for all the components. And DAMO AV is a very unique organization within Department of the Army. DAMO AV, Department of Army, Military Operations, or Management Office, depending on who you ask, Aviation, focuses entirely on coordinating and synchronizing aviation issues and communicating across the whole Army staff, OSD, the Joint Staff, Congress, international, anybody that has anything to do with Army aviation. We try and present a synchronized and coordinated view from across the entire aviation enterprise. So when you hear about the six-pack, many of you that have seen the rest of the members of the six-pack speaking throughout the week, what we try and do is pull that together into one coordinated voice so that Army aviation always speaks as one voice to not only Army leadership, but to OSD's leadership, Joint Staff, etc. And by doing that, we are much more likely to have success in continuing to protect funding and initiatives that we think are important for us to do what Army aviation is all about, which is to always be there to support the warfighter on the ground. That's the bottom line at the end of the day. DAMO AV, there's no comparable organization for infantry. There's no DAMO infantry, DAMO armor, DAMO engineers, etc. And that's because Army aviation is 20 to 25% of the Army's training budget, modernization budget, and combat power. And so it requires a focused shop that can hone in on the specific issues that are unique to Army aviation. The other thing, though, that this shop allows us to do is create a leadership factory for senior leaders in our branch. So many of the officers that once served in DAMO AV have gone on to become six-pack members and will continue to do so. You saw Wally Rugen today, who's taken on the CFT for future vertical lift. Well, Raleigh had the assault lift desk when I had the attack recon desk or was the systems chief. All right? Mac McCurry, who's currently running FDV, which runs all the modernization dollars and now requirements for Army aviation, was the deputy DAMO AV when I was the FDV chief. All of the officers in our shop this year that were eligible for battalion command were selected for battalion command. All of our 06s that had not already commanded a brigade are going to 06 level command. So what we have done as a branch is recognize that it's important that our senior leaders understand not only how the big Army works, but about how big DOD works, how we tie in with Congress, because they are not only our oversight, but they are our benefactors and financiers. So we need to understand them and be able to communicate well with them. So this shop provides us not only that synchronized, coordinated view of Army aviation, but it provides us a host of great young leaders that are going to be able to come up and help lead the branch into the future. So that's a secondary purpose that has tremendous benefit for us across the board. I share that with you in part because for those of you in the audience that are still young enough to have an opportunity to come to us, when you get that set of orders that says, congratulations, you're the lucky winner of an assignment in the Pentagon, I don't want you to have that horrified look that I had when I got the first one, all right? If Army Aviation is sending you to the Pentagon, to DAMO AV or FDV, they're telling you that we see promise in you. You might have a future. You might have to do your own one-man show on this stage someday, all right? So please seek out that kind of assignment. 80% of the jobs for 06s and above in the United States Army, 80% are in the institutional Army, running the Army. Right? It's only a lucky few that are out there right now doing what we all grew up loving to do, which is commanding troops in the fight, downrange, and doing those kind of things. But we got to spend more effort and more time developing folks who are going to be able to continue to rise and make sure that that Army continues to provide everything those soldiers out there on the front lines can provide for them. And DAMO AV will help with that. In the Army staff, there are Army aviators still, though, that operate in the other key functional areas. So in the G4, they've got Army aviators. In the G1, they've got Army aviators. Everywhere else in the G3, from the Force Management Office to the Training Office, you name it, they've all got at least one Army aviator. So the other thing we try and do is pull all of them together into our family. As far as we're concerned, every Army aviator that works in the National Capital Region is part of DAMO AV. Because again, we have to speak with one voice. And there's a tendency, anytime anything about aviation gets discussed, you look around the room and you look for somebody with some of these wings and you say, ah, the voice of Army aviation. What do you think, Captain? And that doesn't necessarily always yield the right answer unless we have brought these folks in and make sure they're constantly updated on what we're trying to do in the branch. So that's another important aspect. Now, I'm only going to show this one slide today, and I'll talk about a couple of highlights on some of the current priorities and things that our shop has been working on. But remember, anything to do with Army aviation comes across our desk. We answer all the RFIs from Congress, all the RFIs from our own senior leadership, from OSD, et cetera, on any topic. But we don't just answer it off the top of our head based on what we feel like, right? And that's why you see this old Greek structure on the right-hand side with the main pillars being our areas of major expertise, like AMCOM, right? That's dealing with all of our airworthiness and our maintenance issues and our sustainment issues and our research and development. Fort Rucker, chief of the branch down there, and all of our doctrine and all of our training, right? And then, of course, PEO Aviation, out there actually interfacing with industry and doing the procurement of these things. So we have to stay incredibly tight with them so that the answers, again, we're providing are in fact well informed by the realities of what can and will take place. And then we help senior leadership come to decisions about prioritization and how we continue to resource what we feel is a very, very critical component and frankly one of the asymmetric advantages of the United States Army. You will not find another Army in the world that has anywhere near the quantity and quality of rotary wing Army aviation that we enjoy. And we want to keep it that way throughout the rest of our history. So some of the things that we do, for instance, is we help manage the 63 issues that came out of our internal holistic Army aviation task force review of things that we wanted to work on. 63 major things that we wanted to improve is herding a lot of cats to try and make those kind of changes. And under leadership of Mark Ott, our operations division, working with OPT leads from across all of Army aviation, in the last year, we have now gotten to the answers and way ahead, decided courses of action and published in orders for 86% of those. We have 9 issues left that we're going to try and resolve. All right, so that's a great deal of accomplishment in the last year. once we make all those decisions, which our goal is by midsummer, this summer, 22nd of July, that's where we snapped the chalk line a year ago and said we're going to knock out the decisions. Now, making the decisions is not the same as having executed all of the courses of action. So when I hand off to Dave Francis to take over DAME OAV, one of the things I'll be handing off to him now is the execution of that. And we come together as an aviation enterprise then and meet at things like the QASM, the quarterly aviation sync meetings, hosted by ForceCom but run by DAME OAV, and bring in experts from all compos and all the major commands to synchronize fielding plans, synchronize ASE fieldings and strategies and all these, any issues and all of the HADF execution plans then will be monitored quarterly to make sure that we don't just say, okay, here's what we're going to do, but we actually are carefully monitoring that it actually happens. It's easy to publish an order, and then a year later, everybody in DAME OAV has moved on and nobody knows if it happened. So our charter is to make sure that the execution is actually carried out. So HADF takes up a great deal of our time, but we're going to wrap that piece up soon. Flying hours, flying hour cost, and being able to be auditable is something that we've been working a lot on in the last year and a half. All right, and we've come a long way on understanding exactly what a flying hour costs and where and how much do we need. We continue to have studies ongoing that help us better understand what is the sweet spot on how many training hours a cab commander needs. We had a lunch today with all the cab commanders, and that's one of the things we ask for feedback on from them. Are you getting enough hours? Do you need more? Do you need, and of course, what they always want is more time, right? More so than money or dollars or anything else. Every cab commander wishes they had more time. So how can we help with that? So that's what that effort's all about. Aviation warrant officer manning. One of the topics that came up, again, about a year and a half ago was the G1 of the Army did some forecasting on what we would have if we didn't change anything in the year ahead, how many pilot shortages we would have, and it was a shocking number. Over 780 holes in formations is what was being talked about. Holes over our desired number of pilots. So again, working across the full enterprise on a way ahead, ultimately DAME OAV published an order going on 3 lines of effort on how we would address pilot shortages. And the first thing is you've got to increase your accessions. For 5 to 7 years, we grossly underassessed warrant officers in Army aviation. Now we did that. Remember, in those 5 to 7 years, what was going on? We had sequestration come in. We were taking massive cuts. We were losing force structure. We went from 570,000 soldiers in the Army. We were headed to 450 and even down to 420 potentially. And so it made sense to underassess, we thought at the time, because training pilots cost an awful lot of money. And so training a lot of pilots that you may no longer have force structure for is not wise use of taxpayer dollars. But then we continued on that pattern. And some of the ways that we were reporting how many pilots we had and how many we were training could be misleading to senior leaders. We have a process whereby we come in, we say, all right, we need this many trained. And then the TR folks will come in and they say, well, I only have enough money to train this many. I can only train 80 of the 100 with the money we have because of the cuts. Well, the way we were talking in the past is we would call that the new requirement, right? The negotiated amount, 80, became the requirement. But the fact is, the requirement was 100. It never changed. It was 100. But then we start briefing senior leaders and we're saying, yeah, we're 100% funding the requirement, which was 80. And you do that 5, 6 years in a row, and next thing you know, you find yourself in a bad place. So we had to increase the sessions dramatically. But if you're going to increase the sessions, you've got to increase throughput at your training centers. All right, so that means you've got to put a lot more resources down at Fort Rucker and at your ATS and anywhere else that you're doing training to handle the additional sessions that you have coming through. And then the next thing you need to do is stop the bleeding on the loss of pilots that you already have and those trained, experienced folks. Now, we've done this before. We got dumb once before and underassessed, and we did those same 3 things. and it worked. So we acted aggressively. We went after all three of those. We put additional aircraft in all types at Fort Rucker. We started pumping extra IPs through. We continue to work on building more and more instructor pilots for Fort Rucker. And we put pilot bonuses in place to start retaining some of the experience where we thought we were at most risk of losing pilots. The end state is we have now cut in half the projections of what we're short. And when I say short, keep in mind that in the active Army, we have a TTHS account for people that are in training, they're PCSing, they're on medical hold, et cetera. And so there's the number of pilots you need to fill every seat in a warfighting unit. And then we try and go to 121% of that. That's the magic sauce number, 121% of what your warfighting units requirements are and your TDA units, including Fort Rucker. 121%. So when you hear about this shortage, it wasn't shortage of warfighting formations, it's shortage of your 121%. And now we've cut that down to, just over 300 on the forecast. And we're continuing to see a positive trend in the right direction. So although we will continue to monitor this daily and constantly make sure and make adjustments in the process, there's not the same crisis that the G1 originally identified because we took rapid action that got us there. We look at our force structure and how to go forward. The Army has identified, as you know already, we have the Chief's priorities for modernization. Well, those were identified based on gaps. That's why the number one issue is long-range fires, right? Because we have some significant gaps against some potential near-peer competitors. Then you get into the next tactical vehicle, future vertical lift, then number 3, the network, air defense artillery, and then soldier systems and lethality, right? Those are our major priorities that we've got to go after. Some of those are going to require force structure growth, all right? So you're going to see, for instance, the first SFAB is just recently reported in Afghanistan. See, I see General Ramin is here. Good to have you, sir. That's force structure growth. But there are some areas in Army aviation that we think potentially need to be reconsidered for force structure growth. One is we are extremely short right now on CH-47 organizations able to deploy in companies in support of ongoing operations, right? We just had a plus up in Afghanistan of aviation, and it was very difficult for us to find the CH-47 assets. So we're going to take a look at and compete in TAA, the possibility at least of a CH-47 battalion in the 101st Airborne with 2 companies. Now, that's compete in. That's not a promise it's going to happen at all, but we think that, at least from the Army aviation perspective, that is a very wise use of force structure growth in order to give us more capacity to fill gift map requirements around the world, but it also returns to the 101st Airborne the ability to move a BCT in a period of darkness, which has always been one of the great unique capabilities of the 101st Airborne Division. So that's something that we've put together a packet to put into the TAA process, and it's just going to have to compete with the other important priorities that the Army has. And then we'll continue to keep that energized in the coming years, and maybe it will be possible. We've also looked at aviation in Europe. Right now we rotate a cab through Europe to keep the appropriate level of aviation support there for a deterrent effect. The Army has to decide, is it going to continue on that rotational model, which may prove to be necessary based on inability to grow what we would need to, or do we want to partially grow back capacity in the 12th cab? They have a partial GSAB there now. We could round that out relatively easily. We could round that headquarters out to a full cab headquarters with just a few personnel, and then you wouldn't necessarily have to rotate a whole cab. We could build an assault battalion there. Again, all choices that will compete in TAA, no guarantees that that will happen, but these are possibilities that exist because we have aircraft that could make that happen. And while we have those aircraft, we have to either decide that we're going to do something like that, or we may change and divest a few aircraft that we have that could have fulfilled that function. So these are questions that we deal with. modernization and fielding strategy, I think you've been hearing about that throughout the whole week from all the PMs and branch chief, et cetera, so I won't get into too much detail about any of those unless you have specific questions. So that's just a lead in. It'll give you a flavor for what DAMO AV is all about, what we try and do. And with that, I'll open it up to the crowd for questions. Courtney. Can somebody get a mic down here for her, please? Brother Bean, here. You're hired. Here's one more in case we need another one.
Thank you. Courtney McBride with Inside the Army. Just a quick question. The bipartisan budget agreement of 18 added about a little over $10 billion for the Army above the original PB 18 request. Wondering how much of that is going to aviation, what you're able to address that you weren't previously, and potentially any other things you're going to try to fight in the TAA would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thankfully, Congress was very generous to the Army in general and ultimately to Army Aviation. We got just a little less than $2 billion back into Army Aviation that has allowed us to increase the procurement of some of our major platforms, including LUH, UH-60, CH-47, and AH-64 Echo models. All right, so anytime we get that kind of plus up, where our contracts allow and there is room to increase the production line in a given year, what that does is that moves our entire modernization strategy a year or two to the left. All right, and that's fantastic news for Army Aviation, because the sooner we can modernize the rest of our National Guard fleet and our reserve fleet and continue the fielding right now as we grow force structure in the AH-64 world, we still have an entire squadron to build in Korea. So moving that to the left and getting new aircraft produced sooner allows us, for instance, to build that squadron in Korea and not have to rotate units through. So you have a permanent presence there on the peninsula at a time when we certainly need and want to have that. So tremendous help from Congress with the omnibus, and that's where the majority of that kind of money goes. As you know, one of the challenges, and we've talked about it time and time again with the continuing resolutions, is that you don't get money until very late in the year. And so when you're making decisions about where and how you can use it, it has to go on contracts you already have. And so when they give you substantial money like that, Army Aviation often benefits because we have large contracts with major OEMs to produce relatively expensive pieces of kit. And that's one of the reasons that we do benefit. But it does not allow you to then immediately get into a new start on new initiatives and things that you'd like to get after for the future. So again, that's why we love the extra help that they've given us, but we'd really love it more if we got it back in October, where then we could start pursuing some of our future ideas that we want to get after for FVL. Jen?
Hi, Jen Judson with Defense News. The House Armed Services Tactical Air and Land Subcommittee just came out with some language in their mark that expresses concern over the Army's ability to mitigate Apache and Gray Eagle munitions and launcher obsolescence. And so I'm wondering if you can maybe talk to anything that the Army's working on. They want a modernization plan of sorts as a result of this language. But what are you thinking in terms of getting after that issue?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. Munitions for the Army. One thing that a lot of people don't understand also is that Army Aviation buys all the munitions for our aviation platforms. So we buy out of our force development dollars all the Hellfires, the JAGMs, et cetera, the 2.75 folding fin aerial rockets. And so we're very much involved in the continued modernization and development of munitions for our platforms. There's a couple of things that we're working aggressively on right now. We have some GUONs and ONs from the field that tell us that we need a few things right away. One is we need a much longer range precision munition to fire off of our Apaches. the kind of range that we have on our current systems are, of course, useful, but there are other systems that outrange us. And so we need to be able to reach out farther if we're going to get into the A2AD umbrella and the IADS integrated air defense systems that are out there. We're going to need something longer range. And so we're very actively looking at what's out in the world today that can potentially scratch that itch, and there's a few of them represented in the building here today. And so we'll be starting a program to rapidly come to some fielding of a longer range precision munition that overcomes some of the shortfall that we have now. The second one that we're really excited about and working on very hard, and I know you and I are going to have an interview here in a few weeks about, is lightweight precision munitions. Right now, we fire a very large number of Hellfire missiles off of our Gray Eagles around the world against targets that don't actually require a tank buster, high-end precision, munition. Those munitions are both expensive, but they're also limited in numbers, and we need them in our war stockage for other contingencies against near-peer type competitors. Vice using them on an individual enemy on a motorcycle somewhere in Afghanistan, right? So what we need is a weapon system for our Gray Eagles, for an example, that gets more stowed kills on the wing. So instead of 1 round per rail, we want at least 3 rounds per rail, ideally, right? And in some of the munitions that exist in the world today, you can get even a much larger number than that. Some of these munitions are as light as 6-7 pounds. And yet, again, if you're going after 1 or 2 personnel in the open, sitting around a campfire or whatnot, that's adequate. And so it is both economically much more feasible, but again, some of our new UAS, our extended range, are going to be able to stay in the air in excess of 30 hours. So if you send them out for a 30-hour mission with only 4 rounds on board, you've got some significant issues. So we want to increase the stowed kills, decrease the cost, while increasing the effectiveness. And so the way we want to get after that is we want to take multiple small bets on numerous vendors that are out there that have some solutions that sound interesting for this purpose, and take them as they are ready. We've put some already through our software integration lab so they can rapidly integrate into the Gray Eagle. And then we'll take them out and we'll start as early as next month, potentially dropping some of these out in the desert in inert rounds to demonstrate they can at least hit the target. And then if they do successfully that, then we will buy a quantity that makes it economically feasible, and then take them and operationally use them in real-world locations. And then we'll get feedback from users. And if the users say, hey, this is great, this is doing everything we need, then we buy more. If the users say, hey, we like it, but, right, then we give that feedback to the vendor. Meanwhile, while we were doing that with the first vendor that was able to get across the finish line, another vendor is ready to test, all right? So instead of naming a line on the P form that says, as it does now, Hellfire missile, this would be named lightweight precision munitions, right? Which gives us room, and Congress would understand that this is going to be more than one in a family of munitions based on different capacities that are necessary. And so now we'll test the next one. And if the next one is either better than or scratches a slightly different itch, maybe it has a little more firepower or it's a little lighter so I can carry even more of them, and it tests well and the users like it, then we add that to the arsenal as well. So there's opportunity, but there's also a constant competition for vendors to continue to lighten and improve the accuracy and the user friendliness of their munition, or somebody else will pass them up and we'll add that to our arsenal instead. So that's an approach of some of the things that we're doing in the munitions profile. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Pat Host with Janes. I had a question about the Apache delivery halt. I was wondering if you could explain what the Mega Nut and the Strat Pack Nut are, and when exactly did you stop taking the deliveries?
Okay, thank you. All right, so the best person to answer that question were General Gabram and General Todd, but I'll give you just an overview.
Thank you.
to not completely duck your question. But the strap pack is a key component that helps hold, doesn't help, it holds the rotor blades on the head of the Apache. The nut itself is then what the strap pack goes around and holds the whole thing together. All right, so there's 4 of them on each head, and if you have a crack there, you can have a catastrophic failure, which then would result in the rotor blades exiting the aircraft, and that's not a good day for anybody, okay? So what we have found is that there were some corrosion issues and other things that may have been the cause of some of these cracks. So we implemented a series of very rigorous visual inspections using bore scopes with high magnification to ensure that we maintain, and we are maintaining, a very safe fleet. If we did not believe that we could fly them safely, we wouldn't fly them at all. But it is onerous on the field to do these inspections at the constant rate that we're required to do it to make sure that our aviators are safe. So what's being designed now, what General Gabriel has referred to as the mega nut, is made of some different metals that are more corrosion resistant and stronger and whatnot. It's thicker in and of itself. And they're also designing then another sort of a fail-safe ring that you can put on the outside of that. So even if there was a crack, you'd get another, the goal is another 10 hours before a catastrophic failure, which would allow you certainly to have landed already and found the problem. And so there's avenues that they're going on to get after this for the long run. In the meantime, though, it did not make sense to us to continue to accept new aircraft off the assembly line going out to the field until we had a solution and that they could put that on place so everything coming off the manufacturer we would know was already good. All right, so that's why we did that. Because we were not accepting any more, we also could not induct anymore into the remanufactured line, because you take holes out of warfighting formation to induct that if you can't fill with brand new E's, then it's an unacceptable loss in overall readiness. Now the exact date that we stopped, I honestly don't remember off the top of my head. Any of my team got that number? I can get that for you, but I don't recall the exact date.
You wouldn't be able to tell me when you expect to start getting these nuts. Are you already getting them, the mega nut?
The mega nut is already in testing, and we expect to get them no later than August. But Boeing is working very hard, and I assure you General Gabriel is driving them very hard to get them even sooner. And then we want to start with at least 2 battalions per month to be able to get them fully replaced as we go forward. Okay?
Yes, sir. John Strand from USRL. You spoke of increasing the sessions and training for our manning problem. Is there any thought into finding out or any programs to reduce the attrition that's happening, possibly from the airlines, or stop people from getting out at 12, 15 years, right whenever that seems like it's an optimal time to stay in?
Right, so the number one program there is the bonuses, right? So there are substantial bonuses up to $90,000 for staying in, and of course they're targeted right in the year groups that are most common for people to make that decision in life. All right, it's always a challenge when you put in place a retention bonus to decide exactly what the right audience is, who do you offer it to. What you don't want to do is pay a ton of bonuses to people that were going to stay anyway, but you also don't want to then miss out on, even if you have to overpay some folks to stay, if you have to target the right people and keep them, then it's worth it. And so we had our first iteration of the bonuses and got some acceptance and some wins, but got some feedback from the field. Okay, well, no, we think you didn't hit the right target, and you should have asked these people, and you didn't account for people that aren't deemed eligible because of some technicality. And so then we revise it, and we're on our second iteration now of the flight bonus. We're having more success with that. And then every quarter we'll reassess what's happening with our actual attrition rates on the target audience fleets and whether we need to continue or to increase or in any way change the flight bonus program.
Is there any thought that it may not be a money issue but a lifestyle issue, a deployment cycle, a
Yes.
PCS?
That's a great point. So obviously, the op tempo is another potential factor, right? And so this is some of the reasons why, for instance, if you finish building the Apache battalion in Korea, and now you're not having to rotate 3 different units at a time or always tied into a rotation into Korea, that will lower the op tempo on the entire AH-64 community just by building that battalion. And so we're also aggressively going after the places where we can affect op tempo and reduce churn and the resultant impact that it has on the aviation community. And that's why, again, I talked about things we're competing in the TAA that will help that, not just in the Apache community, but across all of our communities. Thank you. Sir?
Warren. Sustainability. Hey, sir, Warren Elworth from JH&A. Historically, Army Aviation has done a recurring job, great job, integrating in with other members of the Combined Arms team, particularly infantry, and back in the Cold War, the armored force. The one that perhaps is, as we look at the top 5 priorities and air defense, artillery, and SHORAD being reintroduced as something important, the limitation of some of those systems will be that they still can't go through swamps, they can't operate inside a mega city, off the sides of cliffs, etc. Where aviation, particularly with the demonstrated history of the longbow and the black dark exercises shooting down UAVs as an example, seems to be not bound by the tyranny of terrain. But historically there's been some policy and some interoperability challenges. Are your team, are they looking at how we can open up those possibilities to continue that cooperation?
Yeah, absolutely. Army Aviation, more so than any other air component that I've ever seen, is 100% focused on the integration and air-ground coordination and cooperation. That's what we exist for. We got created out of the desire to have a completely dedicated force that focuses on what's happening on the ground. And in our few little instances where we moved away from the ground force, fortunately we were snapped back, and events like 9/11 brought us back to a focus on the infantrymen on the front line and staying in touch with them. So how do we maintain that now that we are getting into an increasingly complex world of communications and different networks and cyber issues and everything else? That is a big focus in the Army modernization strategy. Embedded within Future Vertical Lift is this tight cooperation between each of the CFTs. So one of the CFTs is the Army network. So Wally Rugen has got to be completely tied in with General Gallagher and the network folks to make sure that as we go forward, we don't break that communication link and that interoperability link with the ground force, because that's the very essence of what we do. So that is a big part of the overall modernization strategy and why the network stayed one of the major modernization priorities. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Certainly everyone sees the importance of the network and most and all the rest, but specifically air defense, artillery, and defending in the biosphere against air targets.
Right.
It's one thing to be integrated, and we hope, thing beyond TAEUS and AMDUs and all the rest, but historically it's been sort of a restriction, joint force and otherwise, on the idea that we're going to use Army aviation assets as like a barrier air defense over the swamps that the IFPC and other ground systems can't go. Is there any effort to integrate, say, priorities 3 and 5 as an example?
Yeah, so with the air defense emphasis that we now are going to have, that will be very much a part of their discussion, is will these systems that they develop and how they're integrated tie in directly with Army Aviation and also require Army Aviation to have additional capabilities. For instance, when I first started flying the KW, we were still shooting Stinger missiles off of them. Will we revisit that? I think, again, that's going to be all part of the emerging doctrine that's coming out of that CFT development of what we're doing with short-range air defense and integrating with the high-altitude stuff as well. I personally am not on the ground floor of knowledge of what they're doing, but I do know that we're involved in that overall plan. And being able to take down an enemy's IADs, we know that we're certainly going to play a big role in that. But that will be an integrated air and ground piece. The only way you're going to get into a complex network like that is to present them with multiple issues and problems so that you can take it down. So again, I'm not in the conversation right now to the level of detail that you might want, other than to tell you I know that Army Aviation is integrated into that piece. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you all. Oh, Jen comes off the top rope.
You have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So I just did a deep dive into unmanned aircraft mishaps within the Army through a FOIA from 2011 to 2017. And it shows that the Gray Eagle mishap rate is actually increasing pretty much every year. I think started out with maybe 4 or 5, and mid-range you got to about 6 per year, and then now we're looking at in the teens. Can you talk what the reasons for this increase in mishap rates for Gray Eagle look like, what the reasons may be, and what you're doing to mitigate the issue going forward?
Okay. Actually, I'll have to check the numbers, because I was tracking that we were actually decreasing somewhat on even the Gray Eagle overall accidents. But a major factor, as we've discussed before, is the various materiel failures. And as you and I have discussed, when you have a materiel failure in an unmanned system, there's no pilot on board to execute an emergency procedure to do something that would be able to potentially save the aircraft, or at least get it down safe somewhere where you could recover it, rapidly repair it, and get it back up. So that is a challenge of unmanned systems in general, and certainly this generation. So there is tremendous effort in place on our major UAS systems, from Shadow to Gray Eagle, et cetera, to attack the known problem areas that have resulted in material failures that resulted in catastrophic loss. And that I know we are seeing tremendous progress in. There's also, though, an insatiable demand for UAS to be flying and up. And so the total number of hours only increases with each passing year. And the demand, not only on the aircraft themselves, but of course, you know, unmanned systems are not actually unmanned. And some of them are more manned than any other, you know, the most manned in terms of PED, you know, the ability to process all the information that's coming off. And so as we go forward, we have to find a way to decrease that manning while increasing the reliability, which in turn decreases your accident rates that you're going to encounter. And then we do other things that have helped us. For instance, we do the automated takeoff and landing for our Gray Eagles. That works extraordinarily well for us. Our accident rates on takeoff and landing are extremely low. By some folks try still piloting that aspect of dangerous area in the flight regime, that we have found to be much better done in an automated fashion. So we continue to work on what our procedures are, but we think we're on a right track there. We're reducing the material failures in cooperation with industry. Again, I'll have to check the numbers on your overall stats. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right, I have time for one more, if anybody wants it. Oh, there you go. The man with Stetson.
Thank you, sir. Sergeant First Class with 16 Cav at Fort Riley. I'm with Shadow, and one of the issues we've run into with fielding, especially off the V2, was that across all the cabs, you are one platoon short of equipment, but you still have the MTO number of personnel. I guess kind of a twofold question. One, are you still going to maintain that full MTO of 3 platoons? And if so, where's the equipment coming from? And if it is coming, what's the timeline for that?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. The answer is I don't think that we're looking at changing the MTO at all. As far as equipment goes, an exact schedule and when you're going to go, that's been a challenge, right? We're buying some shadow systems from the Marine Corps and moving them to the Army, and that's going to help with that to some degree. But part of that is that, as I see Wally Rugen in the back, is that we are wanting to make a leap to the next generation of tactical UAV that's going to free us from any dependence on a runway or landing strip and things of that nature. And so we're in that dilemma that you're always in when you want to make a leap to the next thing, is how much do you continue to buy into existing launchers and platforms, and how much do you take that money to put it forward? So really what we're looking for is, does the CFT have something in the near term that is a quick win where we can start investing in the future rather than investing in what we're doing right now? And I don't think we have that decision yet. Okay? Anything anybody want to add in the back there? Mac, anything? Good? All right, that was deemed acceptable by the actual experts in the back of the room. All right, thank you all very much for taking the time for the one-man show. And if anybody has any other sidebar questions, I'll hang around in the back for a little while afterwards. Thank you.